happy to have Shyam Sunder from Yale University, and it's my great honor to moderate his talk. Shyam is a renowned accounting theorist, and he has contributed to accounting research in many ways, including financial reporting. In fact, today his talk is about what is good financial reporting and how do we get there. Before we start our talk, and then let me mention a few ground rules. So if you have questions, please feel free to type questions in the chat box or use the raise hand function on Zoom, and I would be happy to let you ask questions. But if you don't have questions, please mute yourself. And also at the same time, we would really appreciate that if you can turn on the camera so that we can better mimic the workshop environment. And lastly, I want to say that let's leave like first 5 minutes uninterrupted for Shyam and the last 5 minutes for him to conclude his talk. So let's get started, and Shyam, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Ayung and Stephen, if he's here, for this, your design project, which is itself, I think, a major innovation in accounting thought, and for reasons that I'll go into in a few moments. And though I'm going to interpret design a little bit more broadly than most people do, to include innovation through both deliberate thought as well as through evolution. So thank you for this opportunity to speak to the group, and I look forward to this session. So there are two perspectives on society: design and evolution. These are the intelligent design and evolution, and I'm going to include both of these in your meaning of design in the context of this series. Intelligent design refers to the idea, the Cartesian idea, that we have an understanding of the structure of our universe and the world and the principles and preferences in our society. And we have the ability to engineer social design to suit our desire, to fulfill our desires. On the other hand, evolution perspective comes from Darwinian ideas about mutation and natural selection, which was developed by Herbert Spencer later in the 19th century as social evolution through trial and error. And in the 20th century, the Hayekian idea of emergence of a spontaneous macro order from micro behavior over time. And in the broad sense, I think we can consider both intelligent design and evolution under the umbrella of design in the context. At least that's what I'm going to do. And we'll talk about both these perspectives. So first, on intelligent design, it assumes we have enough understanding of our world and that we have adequate understanding of what we want, and we can design the structures of society so that we can, through deliberate analysis, to achieve the desired outcomes and apply that to accounting institutions and rules. We can design the rules in a way so as to achieve our goals. The idea of intelligent design, that complex social or biological systems, and social systems are at least as complex as biological systems, can be done consciously, that they have the ability and wisdom to define the goals and achieve them through design, that they are or should be invested in the power to enforce the design on others. And who should have such power? Well, there are alternatives. I think there are two alternatives that people have proposed, Heaven or Stanford or London in case of accounting. But to pursue design, I think the prerequisite for design is we have to know where do we want to go. And as you see from this MC Escher drawing, that I'm sure many of you have seen already, here, if you look at this, there are two groups of people moving in opposite directions, and they are all of them are going up. So it is useful to be clear in our minds at the outset which way is up. or which way do we want to go? So let's talk about that. Now, what the meaning of what is good financial reporting, I'm going to list and talk briefly about 7 possible candidates. I'm sure you can easily come up with 7 or 10 or 20 other possibilities. But I think these 7 will be enough to explore the range of possibilities. And I've just listed them here under attributes, descriptive properties, data and disclosure with specified properties, specified social goals, functional perspectives, individual goals, and procedural perspectives. Let's talk very briefly about these. What could these 7 meanings of good financial reporting might mean? First, there's attribute-based approach. You're familiar with terms like true and fair. Why can't accountants tell the truth? Well, of course, there's a problem there. What is true may not be simple, and what is simple may not be true. Both historical cost and mark-to-market accounting have their own claims to be both true and fair, as we have seen. And this attribute doesn't really guide us to make trade-offs, but it retains an aspirational appeal. The aspirational statements like the Declaration of Independence or university honor codes and things like that, where we say life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It doesn't exactly tell us how to settle our court cases or crime cases, but they are aspirational. They are broad approaches to think about how do we address, create order in our world of accounting. We can again think about true and fair as an aspirational approach, but it doesn't fulfill that procedural approach. There are lots of examples of that, and we live with them every day of our life. I won't go through this example here. Second possible meaning is the qualitative attributes that have been used in accounting literature and standards and conceptual framework for many decades. And I've given you a partial list on the left side of the slide: faithful representation, timeliness, relevance, reliability, verifiability, uniformity, and so on and so forth. So these kinds of things have been very useful guide to decide what to do. And for governmental organizations, people come up with a different list, and I have given an example of some of them. The problem, again, these qualitative attributes come with 3 caveats. They don't give us a guidance about trade-offs among them. For example, faithful representation and timeliness, relevance and reliability. There are obvious trade-offs between them, but they don't tell us how to trade them off. There's conflict between desirability among various agents who are involved in accounting, preparers, auditors, users, etc. And there's a considerable ambiguity of meaning, such as uniformity and comparability and conservatism, as we well know. So the meaning looks obvious at a distance, but when you get down into the bushes, it tends to become fuzzy. And I won't go into the details of this here. Then there's a third idea that accounting should produce data and disclosures with some desired attributes. And in the last 50 years or so, the most popular desired attribute, at least in accounting academia, has been correlation between financial reports and stock market data, which is also referred to as value relevant, but I'm not going to go into details on that. So that includes And then disclosures such as consolidated statements, segment reporting, quarterly results, and PSLRA, and non-financial information and all that, risk disclosures and so on and so forth. So largely we have followed in last 50 years since creation of FASB, at least, this approach of producing data, or at least it has been used to defend what has been proposed by accounting rule makers. A fourth meaning could be to serve some specified social goals or functions. But again, there are many different possible social goals. Make a wealthy society, help people their livelihood, create social cohesion, social justice, creation of markets for physical, financial, or human capital to promote economic efficiency, creation and operation of organizations to create and distribute social surplus, coordination and disciplining of individual participation in the organizations, and so on. People have even talked about reducing organizations' cost of capital, which actually amounts to the same thing as reducing the rate of return to the investors. But they don't talk about that. They just talk about reducing cost of capital, which I never figured out what that means. But of course, there's difficulty in how do we link any of these social goals to actually specific accounting standards or accounting rules and accounting practices. Again, they remain at a largely aspirational level. And any rules that anybody in the industry finds inconvenient, as was the case with successful efforts accounting in the 1970s, the oil and gas industry complained that will not be a socially desirable outcome because it will reduce their willingness to invest money in oil exploration in the United States. Fifth possibility is functional perspectives, facilitating efficient organizational operations, creating better markets. Which markets? Well, there are lots of different markets. Better management of public finances, better macroeconomic management, better accountability relationships, creation and communication and enforcement of contracts, provision of information for relevant economic decision agents. And that has been interpreted by FASB recently as information for shareholders. Ignore everybody else. But in any case, these are some of the possible interpretations of that approach.
Shyam, before you move on, Stephen has a question.
Please.
Shyam, hello and welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to see you, and I think it's very good to talk at this level, this high level, before you get into individual standards. One thing that questions me, these societal goals, which you seem to be legislating here, where we all have different goals. A number of those goals there are Marxists wouldn't want those goals. Okay. I
just meant them as Steve. I just meant them as possible examples of social goals, and that list can be much longer, of course. And
okay, but can we get in?
I'm not implying that there's any agreement on what the social goals ought to be. I'm just giving examples. Yes.
Are you saying social society goals are not relevant then? That we cannot work from there?
No. I'm saying exactly the opposite. I'm saying at the outset, I said, here are the 7 approaches to trying to define what is better accounting. One of those 7 is, does accounting meet some specified social goals? Even within that societal goals approach, there are so many ways of defining social goals.
Okay, I see. So you're saying, given this is your social goal, this is how the accounting might follow. With another social goal, you'd have a different accounting. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay, fair enough.
There's so many different possibilities. I'm just listing the vast range of possibilities of what we can think about could be better accounting.
Yes, okay, that's good. Thanks.
Okay, so that's why I showed that NC Escher picture. Which way is up? Which way do we want to go? and it's not just societal goals. You can then talk about individual goals and individual participation. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Jeff Hills has another question.
Hey, Shyam. So thanks for talking to us today. So as you're going through this, I just want to maybe just sort of level set a little bit on like where you might be trying to go with this, because you pitched this as design or evolution, as if that's the choice that we face, as a profession. And I'm wondering the extent to which you mean to imply that, or,
Jeff, I'm not
or
there yet.
It's useful to talk about these things separately and the challenges of them, recognizing that in all likelihood, both can play an important role.
I'm not there yet. Give me a few minutes. I'll get there.
Okay.
And then there are individual goals. And as you know, Blackwell, Dembski, Salter, people have talked about the problem of, can you still see my presentation? Okay. I should have found a way of shutting these incoming calls. It's very difficult to, there are so many different classes of individuals whose goals should financial reporting serve. And people have chosen, different researchers and research programs have chosen different approaches. And those individual goals will not get you to the same solution. And let me not go into, even in case of, even if you define that individuals should be shareholder, it's not even clear that, not only it's not clear that individuals are the only group in the society whose interests are relevant to accounting, but informing shareholders for better investment decisions is not the same thing, as you know, as financial reporting that will increase the stock prices or returns, of which Enron is a great example, but I won't, since you're probably familiar with it, I won't go into that. Meaning could also be facilitating efficient operations of factories, offices, banks, hospitals, receivables, inventory, tax planning, and so on. Meaning could be creating better markets of innovation, financial, labor, product, or other factors of production. Meaning could be better management of public finances in government, municipalities, and so on, budgeting, controls, benefits, pensions. Meaning could be better macroeconomic management, national income accounts, tax policy, legislation, regulatory compliance of labor laws, securities laws, tax laws, tariffs, blank regulation, and cost-benefit analysis. Meaning could be accountability relationships that Ijiri talks about. And meaning could be creating, communicate and enforce contracts, as I discussed in my theory of accounting and control. Meaning could be better decision-making, which is very popular in academic literature. But I'm not passing judgment on this. I'm just listing the broad range of possibilities that exist. Meaning could be procedural, computerized, continuously audited, regulatory compliance. Perhaps I should add blockchain too here, now that it's very popular. So if you look at the recent 8 years since creation of Securities and Exchange Commission, we have essentially taken a design perspective, what I might call the intelligent design perspective, that we have the ability, whether the commission or committees of AICPA or APB or FASB or now ISB, have the ability to devise accounting regimes, accounting rules to achieve some or some or all of these goals. Okay, and so GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, which used to mean generally accepted accounting principles, the idea of a social norm, has now been basically being used as whatever this body of rule makers decide, and so everybody must follow, otherwise they will have to face some sanctions or even punishment. So so we have, this is what has happened in the last 80 years. And I'll take up one example that is quite familiar to you. This is an example from our paper with Ron Dye and John Glover. The results of the design approach in the 70 plus years. Accountants have tried to deal with lease accounting, trying to get them some leases capitalized, trying to get airlines to capitalize the long-term leases on the airplanes. And here's a list of all the statements, the attempts that we have made to try to get them capitalized. So 43 attempts in 37 years. And
Shyam?
Yes,
sorry,
please.
John has a question here.
Please.
Just a quick aside. I mean, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but you know, I've recently been reading some speeches by SEC chief accountants, and I think Burton describes it as, you know, you're trying to push things in a direction, but you can only deviate so far from the existing norm. So there's some, you know, at least in those days, recognition that, you know, the role of regulators and standard setters is, you know, sort of interacting with norms. It's not really a completely a top-down approach. I'm not, again, not disagreeing with your characterization that we've moved more in that direction.
Yeah.
But, you know,
I think that was a very dominant view at the time, as you know, George O'May and other people wrote very extensively about it. You're right. Yes, I agree. So here's just a quick list of these attempts and I think there was one more attempt which is not listed here at the bottom in 2016 or so, the most recent attempt to try to get these leases capitalized. Maybe one of you will tell me whether that most recent attempt has been more successful than the course of previous attempts at designing better financial reporting regime that will achieve their goals, which I presume was to get these long-term leases capitalized on the balance sheet. So now the other aspect of this is evolution and emergence, where the intelligent design might be seen as an impossible dream. And I just have a few quotations here. Samuel Johnson published his dictionary not as a conqueror of language, but as the person who knew how best unconquerable it really is. And the Hayek's concept of a spontaneous order I mentioned earlier, emerging from goal-directed individual action. George O'May's quotation here, rules of accounting, even more than those of law, are the product of experience rather than logic. And Richard Breeden, who was former chair of SEC, common global standards, if read to mean identical, is an illusory and unobtainable goal. However, speaking to achieve similar objectives and to address in an effective way similar problems is a realistic goal. That was his perspective. So I think I mentioned this Darwinian evolution earlier, so I won't talk about this anymore. But on these lines, in social domain, Friedrich Hayek's idea, the social systems emerge through simple interactions among individuals, and preferences and information is inherently dispersed among individuals, and no central authority can have access to this information to achieve efficient central planning, even if it were feasible to do so computationally. I mean, his 1940s debates with Ava Lerner and others who were arguing for central planning versus Friedrich Hayek's decentralization debate argument, is the sense of that. So his idea was that the markets and other social institutions can, not always, can aggregate the preferences and information in possession of millions of individuals. And therefore, the organization like language emerges through interactions among micro units of our society. And if you look at early parts of 20th century, the AICPA and even the regulators basically saw the accounting as a social norm process. That's when they started using the label of generally accepted accounting principles. And all the early pronouncements were in the nature of what was the reasonable practice and trying to get an agreement on it in a highly decentralized mechanism. What was revenue recognition, for example, in 1934, I think, or 35, the Joint Committee of AICPA and New York Stock Exchange wrote 6 paragraphs of rules. One of them was revenue recognition, which was the current understanding of what criteria we should use for deciding when the revenue is recognized. That was 1 paragraph. Now, of course, we have many, many pages of written rules. I'll leave it to your judgment whether we are doing any better on revenue recognition. So the authority of norms in society derives, just as in Oxford English Dictionary, from general acceptance by the community and disapproval of deviations, and not but the standards, written standards, have a great deal of appeal. Yes, please.
Sorry. Yeah, Jeff Hills has another question here.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting again, Shyam, but I'm just trying to get a sense of what the counterfactual, in a sense, would be that we should be taking away, because you've used 2 examples of accounting, like leases and revenue, but I get the sense that like the changes in lease accounting, you're using those as a criticism of the design approach, that it doesn't work. But I get the sense also that in some ways, like, evidence that evolution works would be seeing companies changing the way in which they're accounting for leases or revenue over time, that something's emerging. So the change would be evidence that process works. So am I understanding the points you're trying to make there?
I think that's a good point you're making, Jeff. The intelligent design and social evolution are not quite as distinct from each other as they might appear to be at first. One might say that every one of these, let's say 50 steps in various accounting rule-making bodies trying to write rules of accounting for leases, is itself to be seen as a 50-year process of evolution, right? Just as if you look at a new bridge, let's say George Washington Bridge in New York, we can, on one hand, we might say, okay, so-and-so engineer designed this bridge. He sat down with his blueprints and designed the bridge with his expertise. But another way of looking at exactly the same bridge is to think that it's a result of thousands of years of evolution in human society, where many, many different designs of bridges evolved and were tried out. Some of them failed, some of them succeeded, and every new bridge brought about some innovation. Okay, so if you look at one bridge at a time, it looks like intelligent design. But if you look at the process of how a log across a stream, maybe thousands of years ago, evolved into George Washington Bridge today, it looks like evolution. So that will apply to the social domain and to accounting too. Is that what you have in mind? Am I getting anywhere?
Yeah, no, you're definitely hitting on some of the points, and so yeah, so I appreciate that
Yeah.
context and sort of seeing the overlap between how we might view both of them.
Yeah, you know, I mean, suppose we say that let me set up this company, okay, and the company charter, we go to a law firm and they set up the charter for us. On one hand, if you look at just that one charter, it gives me 10 pages of charter for the company. It looks like design. But that charter itself is a result of evolution over the last few hundred years at least, you know. And then if you look at that perspective, it becomes like evolution. So let me not overstate as if these things are so separate. It can also be seen as a matter of perspective. Okay. Have I addressed your question, Jeff?
Yes, thanks, John, please.
All right, sure. So now,
Shyam, before
please.
you move on, Ian also has a question.
Please.
Shyam, would you mind kind of providing some kind of like the institutional or environmental kind of like background that is kind of potentially make the evolution kind of like approach more preferable for the society? What I'm coming from is that when I'm thinking about if we are going to set some standards, regardless whether that's accounting standard, somehow we need those agents somehow have a very similar, at least some knowledge about the context. And if we are going to actually allow those agents to make those norms without a centralized authority, then the social justice and also the uneven knowledge about the context kind of like will raise some concerns to me, because potentially people may not have the same understanding of the accounting context, and relying on the market or their individual kind of interactions with each other actually puts some disadvantages to people who actually did not have the same level field to start with. So that kind of led me to ask this question: what are the kind of like natural environments or characteristics will be needed for the society to actually pursue the more evolution approach rather than the top-down design approach?
I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Could you please repeat it?
Ayon, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Look at this. Oh, Ayon. This, we are both speaking in English. We are using various hundreds of words in what we just said. Who decided what these words mean? As far as I can tell, I can't figure out who decided. Nobody decided, and everybody decided. So evolution is not that transparent. It's not immediate. And I'm going to talk about this in just a moment. The appeal of standards is that it's easy to identify the history. Who did this and who wrote it? They leave documentary evidence, trace for historians. Norms don't leave much trace. You can, you know, the experts can trace through the history of norms, but it's such a gradual process. It's almost invisible about who decides what various words mean. we debate. In accounting, we debate what is an asset. Okay, that's lesson 1 in accounting. What's a liability? Does it or should it remain like that? Or can somebody have the authority to decide what the word liability should mean and should not mean? Okay, that's a question. Okay, is it by social norm? Was the meaning and constraints developed as social norm over a period of time, or defined by authority? Okay, I get the sense that in your question is the perspective that authority is the way to go. If that's what you think, it's perfectly okay with me. Okay, I'm just talking about that there are 2 ways of looking at it. That's all. Okay.
Yeah, so I think the follow-up is I don't kind of like take sides. I kind of like wanted, what I have in mind is I feel like there's different environments, different societies probably will have a different suitable approaches, but like a little bit guidance on.
But then there are people.
Yeah.
There are people who think that some 10 or 20 people sitting in an office in London can decide this for the whole world. Right?
Yeah, that one well, I'm not going to comment on that. But I think kind of follow up on what John was talking about. It seems that they also take a more hybrid approach.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, and norms are not transparent. They are messy. We cannot track them down so clearly. They're not very well defined. They're not written down. They evolve in small, imperceptible steps, which are not well understood. Evolution is very decentralized, difficult to predict their direction. And while it's not opaque, it does lack much definition. And when there are scandals in the business domain or markets, then, say, well, these norms are not working. Let's write down new rules. Let's do Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever. So during the period of crises, political and bureaucratic decision makers feel pressured to write new standards rather than continue to rely on existing or recently discredited norms and business practices. And as you know, enforcement of norms is by the community, by disapproval, by social sanctions, and not through formal procedures. And there are many aspects of our lives, including business, which operate. You go to Diamond Market in New York on 46th Street, and you see these people exchanging bagfuls of diamond without even looking at what's inside them. All driven by social norms, okay? They don't have, so it's not that in the money and business domain, social norms don't work. They work all over the place, but not everywhere. And so we don't have to assume that, as some people seem to have assumed, that writing rules with authority and enforcing them by sanctions through formal punishment mechanisms is the only way to do accounting. Not many people think about it like this, but maybe some do. There are 4 limitations of design that I don't have time to go into in much detail. The design has information problem because the rule maker must have information about other people's knowledge, their opportunity sets, and their preferences, which is very hard to get. And in fact, that's what Lerner and Hayek debate in the 30s and 40s was all about. Second, evolution, relating to that, evolution actually incorporates a lot more information, but it's slow. It cannot take place immediately. And immediacy of dealing with new issues is of important concern, which leans in favor of many people say, okay, let's go with the writing standards and not depend on slowly evolving evolution of rules. Second,
Shyam?
yes.
John actually wrote a comment in the chat box, and John, do you want to speak it out?
Not really. I put it in the chat box to save time.
Okay.
Okay. You want me to go to chat box and read it?
No. Keep going. Shyam.
Okay. All right. So second is a design problem that we mentioned, the Cartesian design. Do we have enough knowledge to actually arrive through deliberate design at the solutions? And some people will claim that enough knowledge to do the right design is a weakness of the system. Then there's a gaming problem that we talk about in Dye, Glover, and Sunder paper. Basically, you change the rules, and that changes the environment, decision environment of a lot of people, and they change their strategies. They look for better ways of achieving whatever goals they have. And it has been difficult for designers of rules to anticipate how people are going to change their behavior and write the rules which will still achieve their desired outcomes in the change environment. As some of you probably have seen, are familiar with Escapens monkeys with bananas experiment. That is, no, I don't think I have the time to go into that, so I'll skip that unless somebody wants to know. And fourth is a signaling problem, that excluding choice to reporting entities reduces the possibility that those entities can convey actually more information by signaling through their choice of the methods of accounting that they choose. Now, if you look at law, which is close to accounting in some respects, lawyers in the domain use statutory versus common law approaches, and the two of them coexist. You know, after we all followed the trial a couple of weeks ago of this famous case in Minnesota, after the lawyers present the evidence to the court according to the rules of the statutes, the judge turned to the jury and says, ladies and gentlemen, in your lay judgment, was the accused guilty of what he is accused of? And it was the lay jury then that decides about that whether the accused is guilty beyond reasonable doubt. And that reasonable doubt is not specified in the statutes, is defined by the common law, by the community's judgment. Once, long time ago, I was talking to my daughter about this. She was training to be a lawyer, and she said, Papa, in accounting, it seems to me that you are drawing roadmaps for evasion, because the clearer rule, the more clear you make the rules, easier it becomes for a person who intends to bypass those rules to get around them. So if you look at the past 8 decades or so, pendulum seems to have swung, in my judgment, too far, but you may not agree, in the direction of written standards. And we could reconsider a little bit stronger role for social norms and personal and professional responsibility in the domain of accounting and business. I won't go into much detail here, but if we follow the example of what lawyers do, can we use guilty beyond reasonable doubt as they use in criminal law, similar kind of judgments in accounting instead of, in the title of my talk, I talked about means. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Shyam, Gregory has a question.
Please.
Well, I put it in the chat, so if you want to answer it now, you can do it, but otherwise, just save it for later.
Okay, I'll finish up, wrap up in the next few minutes. So I mentioned the title of the talk, though there isn't time to talk about this. The means. We talked about the meaning of what we may want to achieve by better, what we mean by better, but how do we achieve it? And there are many institutional possibilities, and I just listed a few in these in this list. Common law approach, which is the norms approach, popular vote or referendum, that is impractical for accounting, it's too much technical detail for people to know, legislation or statute, which is largely significantly what we have been doing in recent decades. Courts, which is a proposal made by Spacek in 1958, that we should have accounting courts and develop a case law. Just like lawyers have common law development, we should again develop case law for financial reporting. That proposal was not really considered, but it's not really died down, because a lot of people still talk about that 1958 accounting review article by Spacek, and I would encourage you to look at it. Administrative and regulatory agency, that's what SEC is. Self-regulation, large part of auditing had been left to self-regulation until quite recently, a few decades ago, until the Congress decided to override that by creating a PCAOB. And then, of course, there are markets. So there are a lot of institutional solutions to how to achieve whichever meaning of good financial reporting we may want to achieve. And of course, the two choices are not independent. Which meaning you choose and which means you choose, or what combination of means you choose, are related to each other. What is missing in the meaning of better accounting? I've discussed many possibilities. I've not discussed stability, robustness of financial engineering. That's a Sorites paradox, which you may be familiar with. Learning systems fit with the local business and legal environment, recognizing the endogeneity of transactions and complexity, and active engagement of academics with the issues and debates, which I congratulate Steve and Ayun for starting this workshop to encourage people to engage with these issues in academia. Balancing the regime for improving accounting. I'm just putting sort of various dimensions of the tension that we could worry about: regulation and standards versus cultural and social norms, specificity versus purposeful ambiguity, threshold versus continuous approaches, authority versus competition, privacy versus open transactions database. That's Sauter's approach he proposed in 1960s. And confidence in designed social systems versus some humility on our part about our ability to really design systems top down afresh without the benefit of seeing what has worked in practice and what has not worked in practice. So what is better accounting and how we might get there seems to be open questions. They need more attention from us, academia, looking at components of the system is important for constructivist approach to rationality. But looking at the whole is also important, especially from an ecological perspective. And you can't ignore either the constructivist piece by piece perspective or ecological, the whole perspective. So let me just show you two pictures here. Another MC Escher design drawing. What's happening here? You look at the lower right, the water flows in the channel from the lower right. It flows down the channel, flows down the channel, flows down the channel, and then on the top middle, it falls, and that water falls, and then again, it goes in circles. Every individual component of this drawing makes sense. But when you look at the whole, the picture makes no sense whatsoever, which was Escher's point, okay? You can't always focus on individual components alone. The properties of components and properties of the whole can be quite different. I'll show you one more picture and end up here. Take these two pictures here. One is on the left is my lawn, sit in the grass. You can see every blade of grass and even the roots and the bugs crawling in the roots. You can see everything there. The picture on the right was taken by Apollo, a spacecraft in 1968, 69. When it reached 100,000 miles away from Earth, it turned its camera to Earth and saw this blue marble. What do we see in these two pictures? Left picture has all the detail that I can get by sitting on the grass. The right picture tells me something completely different. I don't see the blades of grass, but I see something else. I see a blue marble on which all 7 billion of us were born and are going to die. Maybe a few might get to Mars, but we'll exclude that. But that picture gave rise to the environment movement. It was a new understanding of our place in the universe. Okay. Literally speaking, these two pictures should have no impact on us, but they do. When you look at the parts, when you look at the whole. I think in accounting research, we also have to look at both. Let me stop here. We have a few minutes for more discussion.
Stephen has a question, Shyam.
Yeah, Shyam, thanks. This is very high level thinking. It's about 100,000 miles from Earth. And it's quite helpful. The design versus the evolutionary approach I found helpful. But, you know, most of what you said, I don't think I could disagree with. But it has no bite in it. It doesn't tell me what to do. There's no bite. I've got to get down to actually having accounting policies or accounting design. One thing you referred to is you think maybe the lawyer's approach in appealing to norms with the lawyer's approach with case law is the way to go. But you know, there's a lot of people. What are those? What are the norms? A lot of people who think that whole legal system is generated by male white people, okay, for their privilege, or it's created inequality in society. You're throwing out a lot of ideas. In fact, too many for me to process, actually. But I can't get it down to what am I supposed to do? You mentioned that those people sitting in London are making rules for us all. You seem to object to, but I don't think they do that. They actually start with very firm goals, 2 objectives: provide information to investors and information about stewardship. And then they go on to talk about how they're going to do that with respect to very specific goals. And then they get bite, okay? Then you get bite. But what you said, I can't get down to getting bite. And I guess I see it like you mentioned the Constitution. It has a wonderful preamble that at least we Americans believe in, but it has no bite unless you get into the Bill of Rights. You get into the first one, which has real bite about speech, about religion. You get into the second one, which unfortunately has bite about guns. It gets very specific about what you want to do in terms of getting to this life, liberty, and happiness. And you don't tell us how we get to that from these sort of huge, all-encompassing concepts.
Steve, I could not agree more with you. You are absolutely right. What I said about law and accounting is lawyers do not turn law into all statutes, and lawyers don't turn the law into all case law or common law. They maintain some balance between the two, and that in-between position is not very easy to specify. In between where? 50-50, 30-70, 70-30, what? That judgmental position is achieved through thousands of different decisions by courts and lawyers and the population. Just like with language, where the meaning of words is achieved in a highly decentralized fashion. What I suggested was not to give up on rules and go to norms. All I'm saying here is that we need to think that there's a rule-making world is statutory, like a statutory law. There's a norms world that George O'May was talking about. You know something about him. And that bottom-up practice, okay? And accounting practitioners, users, regulators, they also have to think in terms of some reasonable balance, which can only be achieved through extensive debate and discussion and individual cases where a balance is achieved. What I did say was, in my personal judgment, I think the pendulum has swung last 80 years a little bit too far in the direction of a statutory approach, and perhaps a little bit of adjustment to thinking about evolutionary social norms approach.
Yes, I see that. I see that point well. Yes, that's good. Mm.
That's all.
Mm.
This is fascinating. Thank you, Shyam. Actually, we are almost out of time. Hyun Huang, do you want to type your question in the chat, or you want to just ask it right away?
Also, I think Greg had a question too, right?
Oh, Greg.
How big of a problem is all this that's caused by not being able to identify causation between, say, a bad accounting choice and a bad outcome like a firm failure? So for instance, when we think about how human beings learned how to design dams without them breaking, they learned a lot by what they had done wrong in the past. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to identify those causal links with accounting, even the best intentions. Yeah. You cannot, it's very difficult to figure out whether it's good or bad. There's no analog in accounting to marketing research where people can say, okay, we're going to try this pricing policy or this distribution policy, and we'll see which one seems to work better. It's very difficult to do that with accounting. Does straight line or accelerated depreciation work better? So can you talk a little bit about whether you think that's at the heart of this problem?
Greg, that's an excellent point. It's so difficult to know, except through long-term experience. exactly what is better. And yesterday I was reading an article, a friend sent me an article, which was a review of hydroxychloroquine research since for a long time, actually, over past 50 years or so, including the intensive research which have taken place in the last 12 months about whether this hydroxychloroquine works for COVID virus or not. Okay. The results of various studies and the social complexity of that and technical complexities of that to find out whether this drug is any good or not was just mind-boggling. And as a layman in medicine, I would have thought somebody would have sorted it out in 12 months' time, whether hydroxychloroquine works or not, whether it reduces morbidity or mortality or not. No, there's a huge controversy continues, and there are studies after studies, epidemiological studies, controlled studies, the randomized controlled trials, and there are all kinds of conflicts of interest going on with different pharmaceutical firms pushing for this or pushing for that. In that complicated, where what we might consider science, as Carl Weick wrote and other people have written very beautifully over the years in philosophy of science, science itself is a social construction. For us to imagine that it is anything other than social construction, which is free of our social complexities, is a mirage. I think that's the point that comes to my mind in context of your question. Thank you for raising the issue.
This is wonderful. I know we are out of time, but but we have great conversations here. So if you are, if you need to leave, please feel free to do so. But we still have many good questions. For example, Hyun, he has a question.
I'm glad to stay and answer the questions, but let people who wish to leave, that's fine.
Hi, Shyam. I have a question about your comment about the pendulum that has swung to statutory approach away from evolutionary approach, given that it seems like there are many benefits to having evolutionary approach. I'm curious about why we have adopted more statutory approach. Thanks.
I explained a few minutes ago that rules are clear, they're written down, we can do research on them. Politicians and regulators find them more defensible when scandals happen. They can say, oh, we passed this law, we passed these new rules, we have dealt with the problem. Okay. They feel they have discharged their duties. Imagine after the Enron and other dot-com bubble scandal or the financial crisis, if Congress or SEC had said, okay, let us see in next 10 or 15 years, people will come up with various ideas to deal with this. They're not going to look very good in public domain, right? So, even if they know that what they are going to come up with may be far from perfect, but may also have a small chance of succeeding in achieving its goals, they would look better. They would appear to be more competent and careful and responsive to the crisis that prevails at that time, rather than relying on evolution of social norms over time. That's my personal conjecture about why people tend to prefer written rules. For me, as an academic, written rules also give me nice research agendas every time a board or commission comes up with a new rule. Gives me an opportunity to conduct another event study or whatever study, statistical study you want to conduct. And gives me a way of earning my livelihood in academia. I hope it's not, So I'm sure you can come up with other reasons. That's what you're asking me about. But these are, I'll just mention these two possibilities.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shyam. This is great. I think that's all the questions. Oh, actually, Rajiv Dugar also has a question. Mm-hmm.
Sure. I can always rely on Rajiv to give me troublesome questions. Go ahead, Rajiv.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question, and thank you, Shyam, for your very generous compliment. So it seemed to me, I was able to, I've been listening to you long enough, I guess, and having been a student of yours, or considering myself a student of yours, I guess I see where you're coming from. It seems to me that what you told us about reminded me of depth perception, and depth perception requires the brain to be equipped with the necessary hardware to detect subtle variations in the light inputs that are impinging on the retina, as well as some software to decode those subtle variations in the spectrum that's coming in to make a 3D image out of it. And there are multiple layers. There's also visible light and invisible light that or there are frequencies we can and cannot perceive. It seemed to me that what you were suggesting with that smorgasbord of perspectives that you laid out on what's good accounting, that your enterprise is not just to come up with some foundations for regulation, but much more broadly to understand accounting as a social phenomenon. Would that be correct? That you're not concerned with the man of action. You are concerned more with the philosopher seeking to create a sort of ontology within which things can be processed. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable interpretation.
Accounting education, sorry about the follow-up, but does this, in your mind, is it something that is probably more relevant to what many of us here, do in our daily lives as academics? I'm thinking of, let's say a master's level seminar. We talked about practitioners a lot, and that's the population I largely teach. So when I teach, let's say, standard financial reporting seminars, right, we don't get into a lot of these issues. Many of the traditional approaches just sort of, hand out research papers and say, this is what's being done. I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. So what would be good foundations for that conversation to happen within the academy? How do we lay the foundations of how practitioners think? Seems to me you're pointing us in that direction. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll claim to have some thoughts on it. Rajiv, it seems to me that you can go back decades or even centuries of, there's been so much being written in accounting. Scholars, what I have said today is very little of that is actually new. I'm just repeating what I have read in various works over the past century. But the meaning of accounting research in today's academia seems to have become narrowly defined to the left picture about blades of grass and getting further and further into details. Am I against it? No. Will it give you the whole picture? No. Answer to your question, mine is step back. Get down into the blades of grass, but also step back. Take that 100,000 miles away view and you'll see something else going on. And if we are to give our students or practitioners or ourselves really more than anybody else, to ourselves, a more complete perspective on how things are, I think we need to live with a more complex approach to learning about what the world is like and what accounting phenomena are and how they could be and should be.
Thank you.
Hi, Shyam. We have a good question from Peter Pope. He listed in the chat box, but I think I think we should hear it out.
Oh, Peter, please, if you're there, please ask your question.
Hey, Shyam. Thanks for the presentation. Very stimulating. Just to paraphrase, it's a long question, but it seems to me that one beneficiary group from accounting standard setters is accountants, professional accountants, auditors, and even academics. So I'm just wondering, short form question, whether the private benefits derived from accountants gets in the way of the sort of standard setting world that you see as better, because it creates incentives for evolution and constantly changing standards. We all benefit from that, right?
Yeah, you know, Peter, as I may have mentioned, at least on one of the slides, I may not have said it. I think in any social domain, the aggregate is the result of the micro phenomenon. Even if it's not derivable, it is the results of the micro phenomenon. So private interests of accountants, auditors, CFOs, academics, regulators, whoever else, are all an essential part of accounting. Their actions, interests, perspectives, and behavior in aggregate lead to accounting the way it is. So in my view, I hope I'm not mischaracterizing what you have in mind. In my view, it seems that, you know, I don't think of the pure unadulterated accounting, which is unaffected by personal, private, selfish interests of Shyam Sunder. I don't think there's such a thing. Accounting as a social practice and a phenomena is the result of the interaction, behavior, self-interest, knowledge, actions of all of us. We need to understand and live with it and manage it in the way it really is, and not some ideal accounting picture that it would be if CFOs were angels, or accountants were angels, or academics were angels. Well, we are not living in an angel world, and we all have self-interest and actions, imperfect actions, lack of knowledge, and all that. So it is the way it is, and we should debate it. At least I like to debate it, discuss it, think about it in terms of what it is. Did I mischaracterize or misunderstand your point, Peter?
I'm not sure, to be honest, but I mean, I think I was just differentiating between your usage of the term, social norms, and then picking up on some of the attributes of the standard setting system that you had alluded to, including the constantly changing standards and evolving standards, which, at least this does seem to be observationally equivalent to satisfying the demands or maximizing the value of the standard setting system to the profession. And of course, we know how difficult it is to, we know it's difficult to establish the value of the standard setting system to other groups. So it's really not I don't have a philosophical position on is there a correct set of standards in a first best world where no private interests prevail. I was just really asking the question about to what extent you thought some of the criticisms that you are making of the existing standard setting system might be a function of these private interests that we're talking about. But I should park it there because we're getting late.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Shyam. This is wonderful and fascinating. Do we have any more questions? Let's see. Okay, I think that's all. But feel free, if you have any questions, I think you can email Shyam. I'm sorry, Shyam. I'm
no, must be most welcome. And I think we want to announce the next workshop, right?
I think this is the last workshop for this semester, at least, accounting exam project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your comments, and Lisa and Ion and Stephen. I appreciate this opportunity, enjoyed your comments, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shyam.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.